Warning: the following stories are 100% fictional. If you enjoy this type of stories, feel free to subscribe and share this video with one close friend who likes conspiracy stuff. Also, don't forget to like and write down your opinion on the following video you are about to hear. Enjoy. Me and my girlfriend Ema went on a camping trip on the mountain. We saw unexplainable things in the sky. We wrote a forum on the dark web about it, and two men with black suits knocked on my door. Alright, Reddit, this is something I need to get off my chest. My girlfriend Ema and I had planned a camping trip to get away from our hectic lives. We both work stressful jobs, and the idea of unplugging in the mountains sounded perfect. What we didn't know was that this trip would turn into a nightmare that haunts us to this day. We headed to a remote part of the Appalachian Mountains, somewhere off the beaten path. Ema had found this spot on a camping forum. It was supposed to be serene, with stunning views and total isolation. Just what we needed. The drive took hours, and as we ascended the winding roads, civilization slowly faded away. No cell service, no noise, just the sound of nature. We set up our tent near a small clearing with a perfect view of the sky. The first night was uneventful, peaceful even. We cooked over the campfire, shared stories, and admired the stars. It was the kind of night that reminded you why you wanted to escape the city in the first place. But that tranquility didn't last. On the second night, things got weird. Around midnight, we saw these strange lights in the sky. At first, I thought they were just planes, but they moved too erratically. They zipped back and forth, making impossible turns. Emma was fascinated, but I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something off about those lights. We tried to brush it off, blaming it on our tired minds and maybe a bit too much whiskey, but the lights kept getting closer, more intense. They were almost hypnotic, like they were drawing us in. I remember Ema saying she felt compelled to walk towards them, and honestly, I felt the same pull, but we stayed put, rooted in fear and curiosity. Then we heard it, a low humming noise, almost like a swarm of bees, but deeper, more mechanical. It resonated through our bodies, making the hairs on my neck stand up. The light stopped moving and hovered above us. That's when we saw it. A massive triangular craft with a smooth black surface. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Suddenly, a beam of light shot down from the craft, illuminating our campsite. Emma screamed, and I grabbed her, pulling her back towards the tent. The light was so bright it was blinding, and the hum grew louder, almost deafening. I remember falling, hitting my head on a rock, and everything went black. When I came to, it was morning. Emma was sitting beside me, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. She didn't remember anything after the light, and neither did I. Our campsite was trashed, our tent was shredded, supplies scattered everywhere. It looked like a bear had attacked, but there were no animal tracks, just strange circular imprints in the ground. We packed up and left in a hurry, not speaking much on the way back. We didn't know how to explain what had happened, or even if anyone would believe us. When we got home, Ema suggested we post about it on a forum she had found on the dark web, dedicated to unexplained phenomena. I was hesitant, but we were desperate for answers. The response was overwhelming. Some people shared similar experiences, while others called us liars or attention seekers. But one comment stood out. It was from someone claiming to be an ex-government employee. They warned us to take down the post immediately, saying we had stumbled onto something we shouldn't have. Emma thought it was just another troll, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. 2 nights later, there was a knock at our door. It was 3 a.m., and I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 men in black suits, their faces obscured by the shadows. My heart raced. I whispered to Ema to stay quiet and grabbed a baseball bat from under the bed. "Open the door, Mr. Jensen. We need to talk," one of them said, his voice cold and emotionless. They knew my name. My blood ran cold, and I felt Emma clutch my arm in fear. I didn't open the door. Instead, I asked who they were and what they wanted. "We're from the government. You need to come with us," the other one said. I wasn't buying it. If they were really from the government, they'd have some kind of ID, right? But they never showed any. They knocked again, harder this time, and the door rattled on its hinges. "Mr. Jensen, this is your final warning. Open the door, or we'll be forced to take action." I backed away, pulling Ema with me. We retreated to the bedroom, locked the door, and called 911. The operator said they were sending a patrol car, but we lived in a rural area, and it would take time for them to arrive. The men kept knocking, their voices growing more insistent. Then just as suddenly as they had appeared, they left. I heard a car start and drive away. When the police finally arrived, they found no trace of the men. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. Emma and I were left shaken and paranoid. We didn't sleep that night, and we barely spoke to each other. We both knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Whatever we had seen in the mountains, it was something we were never meant to witness. And now, it seemed like there were people, or things, that wanted to make sure we stayed quiet. Ema and I were haunted by the events of that night. We stopped talking about what happened on our camping trip and pretended like life could go back to normal, but it was impossible. Every time a car drove past our house, I would tense up, expecting those men in black suits to return. I decided to install security cameras around the house, hoping to catch any suspicious activity. Ema thought I was being paranoid, but she didn't argue. I think she was just as scared as I was. For a while, it seemed like we might be able to move on. But then, things started to get even stranger. One night, I woke up to the sound of Ema talking in her sleep. This wasn't unusual, but what she was saying chilled me to the bone. She was speaking in a language I didn't recognize, and her voice sounded different, deeper, almost like a growl. I shook her awake, and she looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I had a dream," she whispered. "I was back in the mountains, standing under that light. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I felt like I was being watched, studied. I tried to comfort her, but the truth was, I was just as scared." Ema's sleep talking became a nightly occurrence, and each time she spoke in that same eerie language. It was like she was being controlled, like something was trying to communicate through her. Then came the nosebleeds. They started a few days after her sleep talking began. Emma would wake up with blood dripping from her nose, staining her pillowcase. We went to the doctor, but they couldn't find anything wrong. "Stress," they said. "Just stress." But we both knew it was something more. One night, as I was reviewing the security footage, I noticed something strange. There was a flicker of movement in the backyard, just beyond the reach of the camera's night vision. I rewound the footage and played it back frame by frame. There, standing in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall and thin, with glowing eyes that stared directly at the camera. My heart pounded as I watched the figure slowly move closer to the house. It paused at the back door, its hand reaching out to the doorknob. I felt a surge of fear and anger. I wasn't going to let this thing terrorize us any longer. I grabbed the baseball bat and rushed outside, but by the time I got there, the figure was gone. I checked the footage again, hoping to find some clue, but the figure had disappeared without a trace. The only evidence it had ever been there was a strange metallic residue on the doorknob. I collected a sample and brought it to a friend of mine who worked in a lab. He promised to analyze it and let me know what he found. A few days later, he called me, his voice shaking. "I don't know what this stuff is, man. It's not like anything I've seen before. It's alive. I think you should get rid of it." I didn't need to be told twice. I threw the residue in the trash and tried to forget about it, but it was clear that we were being watched, that something was keeping tabs on us. Ema's condition worsened. She became more withdrawn, more fearful. She started seeing things, claiming there were shadows moving in the corners of the room, whispering her name. One evening, as we were having dinner, there was another knock at the door. This time, I was ready. I grabbed the bat and flung the door open, but there was no one there. Instead, there was an envelope on the doorstep, with my name written on it in an elegant, unfamiliar script. Inside was a single piece of paper with a message that made my blood run cold. "Stop looking, stop asking. This is your final warning." There was no signature, no clue as to who had sent it. Emma broke down, crying hysterically. "Why won't they leave us alone?" she sobbed. I held her, feeling helpless. I didn't have any answers, only more questions. What had we stumbled onto in those mountains? Why were we being targeted? That night, I set up an alert system with the security cameras, so I would be notified immediately if there was any movement. I stayed up, watching the footage live, while Emma slept fitfully beside me. Around 2 a.m., the alert went off. My phone buzzed, and I saw the same figure from before, standing at the edge of the yard, watching the house. I didn't go outside this time. Instead, I watched as the figure moved closer, stopping just short of the camera's view. It seemed to know exactly where the blind spots were. Then it did something that made my heart stop. It pointed directly at the camera and then at the house. It was a clear message. "I know you're watching, and I can get to you anytime." The next morning, I decided to check the dark web forum where we had posted about our experience. Our post was gone, along with the account we had used. It was as if we had never been there. I created a new account and tried to post a warning to others, but my message was deleted almost instantly. That's when I realized that we were in over our heads. Whoever or whatever was after us had the power to erase our existence, to make us disappear. We were alone, with no one to turn to for help. And the worst part was, I had no idea how to protect Ema or myself from whatever was coming next. The realization that we were alone hit us hard. Emma's condition continued to deteriorate, and I felt like I was losing her bit by bit. Her nosebleeds became more frequent, and she started getting these intense migraines that would leave her incapacitated for hours. She would cry, clutching her head, begging for the pain to stop. I felt helpless, unable to do anything but hold her and hope it would pass. One night, as I was trying to comfort Ema during one of her episodes, I noticed something strange on her back. Under her skin, There were these faint glowing lines that seemed to form a pattern. I tried to touch them, but she flinched in pain. The lines disappeared as quickly as they had appeared, leaving me even more disturbed. We needed answers, and fast. I reached out to the ex-government employee who had warned us on the forum. I found his email address buried in some old threads and sent him a desperate message explaining everything that had happened since our trip. He responded quickly, asking for a meeting in a public place. He didn't want to risk being traced. We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. He was an older man with deep lines on his face and a nervous twitch. He introduced himself as David and wasted no time getting to the point. "You and your girlfriend have stumbled upon something you shouldn't have," he said, his voice low and serious. "The lights you saw, the craft, they're not from this world. And the men who came to your door, they're part of a shadowy organization that monitors and controls these kinds of incidents. They call themselves the Men in Black." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why us? Why are we being targeted?" David sighed, looking around nervously. "You saw something they didn't want you to see. They can't afford to have witnesses. Most people who encounter these things don't live to tell the tale. You're lucky to be alive, but that luck won't last if you keep digging." Ema, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "What about these?" She lifted her shirt slightly to show the faint glowing lines on her back. David's eyes widened in shock. "Dear God," he muttered. "They've marked you. It's a tracking mechanism designed to keep tabs on you. They know where you are all the time." I felt a wave of anger and fear. How do we get rid of it? How do we stop them? David shook his head. "You can't. Once you're marked for life. The only thing you can do is go off the grid, and hope they lose interest. But even then, it's a slim chance." Ema looked at me, tears in her eyes. "I can't live like this. We can't live like this." David leaned in closer. "There's one other option, but it's risky. There's a place deep in the mountains where the electromagnetic interference is so strong that it disrupts their tracking devices. If you can make it there, you might be able to stay hidden." Desperate and with no other options, we decided to take the risk. David gave us a rough map of the area and some supplies to help us survive the journey. We packed our things, left our phones behind, and set out for the mountains once again. The journey was grueling. The terrain was rugged, and we had to move quickly to avoid being detected. We camped in hidden spots, always on edge, always looking over our shoulders. Ema's condition worsened, and the glowing lines on her back became more pronounced. They pulsed with an eerie light that seemed to sync with her pain. One night, as we were setting up camp, we heard it again, the low humming noise that had haunted us since our trip. The lights appeared in the sky, moving erratically, searching. I grabbed Ema and we hid under a rocky outcrop, hoping the interference would be enough to mask our presence. The lights hovered above us, scanning the area. The hum grew louder, and I felt a pressure in my chest, like my heart was being squeezed. Ema clung to me, her body trembling. The lights moved closer, and I could see the outline of the triangular craft, just like before. I whispered to Ema, trying to keep her calm. "It's okay. They're not going to find us. We're safe here." But I wasn't sure. The craft seemed to linger, almost as if it knew we were there. Then, without warning, it shot a beam of light directly at our hiding spot. I felt a searing pain in my head. like it was being split open. Emma screamed and everything went black. When I came to, the craft was gone and Emma was unconscious beside me. I checked her pulse. She was alive, but barely. I knew we couldn't stay here. I had to get her to safety, to that place in the mountains where we might stand a chance. I carried Emma on my back, pushing through the pain and exhaustion. Every step felt like a mile, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. We were close. I could feel it. The air around us grew thick with static, and my hair stood on end. We were entering the interference zone. Just as dawn was breaking, I saw it. A small abandoned cabin nestled in a grove of trees. It looked like it had been there for decades, forgotten by time. I staggered towards it, kicking the door open and laying Emma down on the dusty floor. I collapsed beside her, too exhausted to move. As I drifted into unconsciousness, I could only hope that this place would be our sanctuary, that we would finally be safe from the horrors that had been chasing us. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. When I woke up, it was dark again, and Ema was still unconscious beside me. The cabin was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves outside. I sat up, feeling the ache in my muscles from carrying Ema all this way. I checked her pulse again, still weak, but steady. We were alive, but for how long? I explored the cabin, hoping to find something useful. It was a single-room structure with a rusted stove, a rickety table, and a few broken chairs. There was a small stash of canned food and some dusty blankets in a corner. It wasn't much, but it was something. As I rummaged through the cabinets, I found an old radio. It was ancient, with a cracked dial and frayed wires, but I hoped it might still work. I fiddled with it, trying to get a signal, but all I got was static. Frustrated, I set it aside and turned my attention back to Ema. Her breathing was shallow, and she looked pale. The glowing lines on her back were still there, pulsating with a soft, rhythmic light. I didn't know what they were doing to her, but I had to find a way to stop it. I went outside, hoping to find some fresh water. There was a small stream nearby, and I filled an old bucket I found in the cabin. As I was heading back, I noticed something strange. There were no animal sounds, no birds, no insects, nothing. The silence was unnerving. Back in the cabin, I tried to wake Emma. She stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. "Where are we?" she whispered. "We're in a cabin," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We're safe for now." She nodded weakly, her eyes closing again. I gave her some water and tried to get her to eat, but she was too weak. I felt a surge of helplessness. I didn't know how to help her. That night, as I was sitting by the window, keeping watch, I heard the humming again. My heart raced, and I looked out into the darkness, expecting to see the lights, but there was nothing. The humming grew louder, and I felt that same pressure in my chest. I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the cabin itself. I frantically searched the room, trying to find the source. The humming seemed to be coming from beneath the floorboards. I pried up one of the boards and found a small metallic device embedded in the dirt. It was the size of a coin, with intricate patterns etched into its surface. As I touched it, the humming intensified, and the lines on Ema's back began to glow brighter. I yanked the device out of the ground, and the humming stopped abruptly. Ema gasped, her body convulsing. I rushed to her side, holding her as she shook. The glowing lines started to fade, and she took a deep, shuddering breath. "They're coming," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. We need to get out of here. I helped her up, and we stumbled out of the cabin. We had no idea where we were going, but we couldn't stay there. The interference zone might have been disrupting their tracking, but they knew we were close. We moved through the forest, trying to stay hidden. The darkness was disorienting, and every rustle of leaves made my heart skip a beat. We needed to find shelter, somewhere safe. I remembered David's words about the electromagnetic interference and realized we needed to get to higher ground. We climbed a steep hill, our progress slow and painful. Emma was barely able to walk, and I had to support her most of the way. The air grew colder, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees. We reached the top of the hill and saw another small cabin in the distance, even more dilapidated than the last one. It wasn't much, but it was our only option. We made our way to the cabin and collapsed inside. This one was even barer than the first, just a single room with a dirt floor and a few broken pieces of furniture. But it felt like a haven compared to the open forest. I barricaded the door as best I could and helped Emma to a corner, wrapping her in one of the blankets. As I sat there, holding her, I noticed something strange, a faint blue glow coming from the corner of the room. I crawled over and found another device, similar to the one I had dug up, but larger. It was embedded in the wall, its light pulsing rhythmically. I didn't dare touch it, not knowing what it might do. Instead, I tried to cover it with some debris, hoping it would be enough to block whatever signal it was sending. The glow dimmed slightly, but I knew it was only a temporary fix. Ema stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "What is it?" she asked weakly. "Another device," I said. "I think it's tracking us." She nodded, her eyes closing again. "We can't keep running forever." "I know," I said, feeling the weight of her words. "But we have to try." That night, I stayed awake, watching the door and listening for any sign of the men in black suits. The wind howled outside, and the cabin creaked and groaned, but there was no sign of them. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to hope that we might actually be safe. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. They would find us eventually, and when they did, I had no idea what we would do. As dawn broke, the first light filtering through the cracks in the cabin's walls, I knew we couldn't stay much longer. Emma was growing weaker by the hour, and I was running out of ideas. I could feel the weight of the previous night's terror hanging over us like a dark cloud. We ate a small breakfast from the canned food stash and tried to regain some strength. Ema's hands trembled as she held the spoon, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread settling in my chest. I knew the men in black would find us soon, and I didn't know if we would have the strength to keep running. Suddenly, the radio I had found in the first cabin crackled to life, filling the room with static. Emma and I exchanged a frightened glance. I reached for the radio, fiddling with the dial, trying to make out any words through the noise. A voice finally broke through, faint and distorted. "If you're hearing this, you're not alone. We know what you've seen, and we can help. Head to the coordinates, 38.9629 degrees N, 76.4945 degrees W. We're waiting for you." I stared at the radio, heart pounding. It was our only lead, our only chance at finding someone who could help us. I scribbled the coordinates on a scrap of paper, my hands shaking. "We need to go," I said, helping Ema to her feet. We left the cabin and started our trek towards the coordinates, using the sun to guide us. The terrain was rough, and every step felt like a battle. Ema stumbled often, and I had to support her as much as I could. The whole time, the fear of being discovered gnawed at the back of my mind. Hours passed, and the sun was high in the sky when we finally reached the location. It was a clearing, surrounded by dense forest, with an old, abandoned barn at the center. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades, but there were fresh tire tracks leading up to it. We approached cautiously, my grip on the baseball bat tightening. As we got closer, the barn door creaked open and a figure stepped out. It was David. Relief washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by suspicion. "David, what are you doing here?" I demanded. "I told you I'd help," he said, his eyes darting around nervously. "But we need to hurry. They're close." He led us inside the barn, where a group of people were gathered around a table covered in maps and equipment. They looked like they had been living on the run for a long time, just like us. "This is a safe house," David explained. "We're part of an underground network trying to expose the truth about what's happening. We've been monitoring the activity in these mountains for years." Ema collapsed onto a nearby chair, too exhausted to speak. I turned to David, desperation in my voice. "Can you help her? She's been marked." David nodded grimly. "We have a way to disrupt the tracking signal, but it's risky. It involves using a strong electromagnetic pulse. It could save her, but it could also cause severe damage." I didn't hesitate. "Do it. We don't have any other choice." They laid Ema on a makeshift operating table and started preparing the equipment. I held her hand, trying to keep her calm as they explained the procedure. They attached electrodes to her temples and chest, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "Hold on, Ema," I whispered. "We're going to get through this." David activated the machine, and a loud hum filled the barn. Ema convulsed, her body arching in pain. I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't let go of her hand. The glowing lines on her back flared brightly, then slowly began to fade. After what felt like an eternity, the machine powered down. Ema lay still, her breathing shallow but steady. The lines were gone. David checked her pulse and nodded. "It worked. She's free." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Outside, we heard the unmistakable sound of engines approaching. The men in black had found us. Panic set in as everyone in the barn scrambled to prepare for a confrontation. David handed me a small handheld device. "This is a jammer. It'll buy you some time, but you need to get out of here. There's an old tunnel system beneath the barn. Use it to escape." I grabbed Ema, who was just starting to regain consciousness, and helped her to her feet. We followed David to a hidden trapdoor in the floor. "Good luck," he said, his eyes filled with fear and determination. "And remember, you're not alone." We climbed down into the tunnel, the sounds of the approaching vehicles growing louder. The tunnel was dark and cramped, but it provided a sliver of hope. We moved as quickly as we could, the sound of footsteps and voices echoing above us. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the earth. The air grew colder, and the darkness pressed in around us. We had no idea where we were going, but we kept moving, driven by the instinct to survive. Finally, after what felt like hours, we emerged into another clearing, far from the barn. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. We were exhausted, but we couldn't stop. We had to keep running, keep hiding, until we found a way to end this nightmare. As we moved through the forest, I felt a renewed sense of determination. We had escaped for now, but the fight wasn't over. We would find others who believed, who had experienced what we had. Together, we would uncover the truth and expose the darkness that had been haunting us. And as long as we were together, I knew we had a chance. We would keep running, keep fighting, until we were finally free. I found Rothschild Secret Alien Museum on the dark web. Hey Reddit, I don't usually post here, but after what happened to me last month, I need to get this off my chest. I've always been a bit of a thrill seeker, diving into the darkest corners of the internet just to see what's out there. But this time, I went too far. This is the story of how I stumbled upon Rothschild's secret alien museum on the dark web, and the horrors I found within. It all started on a typical Friday night. I was bored out of my mind, scrolling through forums and chat rooms, looking for something interesting. That's when I came across a thread titled Deep Web Curiosities. Most of it was the usual crap: conspiracy theories, illegal marketplaces, and urban legends. But one post caught my eye. It was from a user named Alien Archivist, who claimed to have access to a hidden museum curated by the Rothschild family, showcasing extraterrestrial artifacts and specimens. He said he could provide a link for a hefty price in Bitcoin. It sounded like total BS, but my curiosity got the better of me. I scraped together the necessary amount and messaged him. Within minutes, he replied with a series of instructions on how to access the museum. It involved using Tor, connecting through several layers of VPNs, and finally entering a long string of code into a dark web browser. The process took hours, and I almost gave up halfway through. But eventually, I found myself staring at a plain, unmarked website with a single clickable link that read Enter. The first thing that hit me was the silence. It was as if the website existed in a vacuum. No background noise, no ambient sound, just an eerie stillness. I clicked the link, and the screen went black for a few seconds before a loading bar appeared. It felt like an eternity. But finally, the page loaded, revealing what looked like a virtual tour interface. The main hall was massive, filled with glass cases and pedestals, displaying all sorts of bizarre items. Some looked like ancient artifacts, while others were more modern, but equally strange. I clicked on one of the pedestals and a description popped up. It was a piece of metal, supposedly from a crashed UFO recovered in Roswell. Another case held what looked like a preserved alien fetus, with skin that was a sickly grayish green, and eyes that were unnervingly human. I was both fascinated and horrified, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The further I went, the more disturbing the exhibits became. There were photos of mutilated cattle, autopsy reports of creatures that defied description, and even video footage of what appeared to be live dissections. I felt a pit forming in my stomach, but I kept going, driven by a morbid curiosity. Then I came to a section labeled Human Experimentation. The images and videos here were far worse than anything I'd seen before. People, ordinary men, women, and children, being subjected to unspeakable horrors. Some were strapped to tables, their bodies cut open and organs exposed. Others were in cages, their limbs twisted and eyes vacant, as if they'd been lobotomized. I felt bile rise in my throat, but forced it down, unable to stop myself from looking. One video, in particular, caught my attention. It was dated just a few months ago, and showed a young woman, probably in their early 20s, being dragged into a sterile white room. She was kicking and screaming, begging for mercy, but the men in lab coats ignored her pleas. They strapped her to a table and injected her with something that made her convulse violently. Her screams turned into gurgles as blood foamed from her mouth. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing every moment of her agony. I had to look away, my heart pounding in my chest. Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the screen flickered and a message appeared. Live feed. My hands were shaking as I clicked on it. The feed showed a dimly lit room with several figures moving about. At first, I couldn't make out what was happening, but then the camera focused, and I saw a man chained to a wall. He was naked, his body covered in cuts and bruises. His eyes were wide with terror, darting around the room as if searching for an escape. A figure stepped into the frame, wearing a mask and holding a scalpel. They approached the man slowly, savoring his fear. The man started to scream, a guttural primal sound that made my blood run cold. The masked figure began to cut, and the man's screams turned into a high-pitched wail that seemed to go on forever. I couldn't take it anymore. I closed the browser, ripping off my headphones and stumbling back from my desk. For a few minutes, I just sat there, shaking and trying to process what I'd seen. My mind was a whirlwind of horror and disbelief. Had I really just witnessed that? It felt like a nightmare, but the images were seared into my brain. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep that night, or maybe ever again. I thought about reporting it to the authorities, but what could I say? Hey, I was browsing the dark web and found a secret alien museum run by the Rothschilds. They'd think I was insane. Besides, I had no proof. The second I closed the browser, the link was gone, and I couldn't find the forum post anymore. It was as if the whole thing had been a hallucination, but I know what I saw. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see that man's face, twisted in agony, and hear his screams echoing. In my mind, I'm haunted by the knowledge that somewhere out there, those horrors are real, and there's nothing I can do to stop them. For days, I couldn't shake the images from my mind. They followed me everywhere, into my dreams, my quiet moments at work. Even when I was trying to relax, I started to get paranoid, constantly feeling like I was being watched. My friends noticed I was acting off, but how could I explain it to them without sounding insane? One night, I decided I had to know more. Maybe if I understood what I had seen, I could make peace with it. I dove back into the dark web, retracing my steps. It took hours, but I finally found a trace of the alien archivist in a chat room. He was offering a new link, claiming to have updated content. I didn't hesitate. I had to see it. The new link led me back to the same eerie silence and plain black screen. But this time, the interface was different. It was less like a museum and more like a collection of live feeds and recent uploads. The title read, Rothschild's Collection, Expanded. The first feed I clicked on showed a laboratory setting. Scientists in white coats were working on something large and metallic. As the camera zoomed in, I saw it was an alien craft, partially dismantled. They were extracting what looked like glowing blue fluid from it, storing it in small vials. The fluid seemed almost alive, writhing and pulsating within its container. The scene cut to another room, where a man in a suit was overseeing the operation, his face stern and emotionless. I navigated to the next feed, which showed a row of cells. Inside each one was a different creature. Some were humanoid, with elongated limbs and bulbous eyes. Others were grotesque hybrids of human and animal, their bodies twitching and convulsing. One cell held a child, no older than 10, with eyes that glowed an unnatural shade of blue. He stared directly into the camera, as if he could see me watching. His mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I could feel his fear and desperation. I switched to another feed. This one showed a large chamber filled with giant tanks. Each tank contained a humanoid figure floating in a greenish liquid. Their eyes were open, unblinking, and their skin was pale and translucent. One of the figures suddenly twitched, banging its hand against the glass. I jumped, my heart racing. It was alive, and it knew it was being watched. The last feed was a live dissection. A creature, unlike anything I'd ever seen, lay on the table. Its skin was a deep black, covered in scales that shimmered under the harsh lights. The scientists were cutting it open, removing organs and placing them into labeled containers. The creature's eyes remained open, its face twisted in what looked like pain, even though it was clearly dead. They spoke in hushed tones, their faces grim. I couldn't take it anymore. I backed out of the feeds, my breathing heavy. I felt like I was going to be sick. Just as I was about to close the browser, a new message popped up on the screen. Interested in a tour? My blood ran cold. Someone was watching me, knew I was there. I hesitated, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked yes. A chat window opened and a message appeared. Meet me at the coordinates below. Come alone. The coordinates were for an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Every logical part of my brain screamed at me to ignore it, but I had to know the truth. I grabbed my coat and headed out, my mind racing with possibilities. The warehouse was exactly as expected, dark, decrepit, and reeking of decay. I walked through the main door, my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The silence was oppressive, every creak and groan of the building amplified in the stillness. I was about to turn back when I heard a noise, a faint shuffling sound coming from deeper inside. I followed it, my heart pounding in my chest. As I rounded a corner, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with sunken eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. "You're the one from the dark web," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "You want to see the truth." I nodded, unable to speak. He turned and beckoned me to follow. We walked through a maze of corridors until we reached a large steel door. He punched in a code, and the door hissed open. Inside was a room filled with high-tech equipment, screens displaying various feeds from the museum. "This is where it all happens," he said. "The Rothschilds, the experiments, the aliens, they control it all. And now, you're part of it." Before I could react, I felt a sharp pain in my neck. My vision blurred, and I collapsed to the floor. The last thing I saw was the man standing over me, a syringe in his hand, and a sinister smile on his face. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was strapped to a table in a sterile white room. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the restraints. The door opened and the man walked in, accompanied by several scientists. They ignored my pleas, discussing me as if I were an object. "Subject 42, one of them said. "Perfect candidate for the next phase." I screamed, but it was useless. They injected me with something that made my body go limp, my mind foggy. As they began their work, I realized the horrible truth. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was an exhibit. I don't know how long I was out. Time seemed to stretch and warp in that sterile room, filled with the cold hum of machinery and the hushed whispers of scientists. When I finally came to, I found myself in a different place, strapped to a vertical slab of metal, my limbs bound by thick leather straps. The room was dimly lit, with a single overhead light casting a harsh glow on my face. My body ached, a deep, throbbing pain that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I tried to move, but the restraints held me fast. Then I noticed the others. All around me, in a semicircle, were other slabs, each one holding a different person. Their eyes were vacant, their bodies limp. Some were hooked up to tubes and wires. Others had grotesque scars running across their skin. A few were mumbling incoherently, their minds clearly shattered by whatever they'd been through. "Welcome to the collection," a voice said, startling me. I turned my head as much as I could and saw the man from the warehouse standing there, a clipboard in his hand. "You're quite the find, you know. Not many have the guts to follow the trail as far as you did." I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry, my throat constricted. He seemed to understand my struggle and motioned to a nearby scientist, who adjusted a dial on a machine. A cool liquid flowed into my arm, and I felt a bit of the pain and dryness recede. "Better?" the man asked, his tone almost conversational. "Good. Now, let me explain. You see, the Rothschilds have been collecting and experimenting on extraterrestrial and human subjects for decades. We are at the forefront of discovering the limits of human and alien biology. And now, you get to be part of that." He turned and gestured to the others. "These are your new friends. Each one has a unique story, just like you. But now, they're part of our research, contributing to the advancement of knowledge in ways they never could have imagined." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what he meant. These people weren't just victims. They were living experiments. I had stumbled into a nightmare far worse than anything I could have imagined. "We're going to start with some basic tests," he continued, as if discussing the weather. "Simple things, really. We'll measure your responses to various stimuli, see how your body reacts under different conditions, and of course, we'll be taking samples." I struggled against the restraints, my fear giving me a burst of strength, but it was no use. The straps were too tight, the metal too strong. "Don't bother," he said almost kindly. "You'll only hurt yourself. Now, let's begin." The next few hours, or was it days, were a blur of pain and confusion. They injected me with different substances, monitored my vital signs, and took samples of my blood, skin, and other tissues. I was prodded and poked, scanned, and analyzed. Every so often, they'd attach electrodes to my head and subject me to strange, disorienting images and sounds. I lost track of time, my mind becoming a haze of agony and terror. I saw flashes of the other subjects, their vacant eyes staring at nothing, their bodies twitching and convulsing. I felt a deep, overwhelming despair settle over me. I was no longer a person. I was just another specimen, another data point in their twisted experiments. One night, or maybe it was day, the man returned. He looked at me with a curious expression, as if I were a particularly interesting insect he had found under a rock. "We've learned a lot from you," he said, "but there's still so much more to discover, and I think you're ready for the next phase." He nodded to a scientist who pressed a button on a control panel. My slab began to move, tilting forward until I was almost horizontal. A metal arm descended from the ceiling, holding a large, gleaming needle. I felt my heart race, panic surging through me. "This will only hurt for a moment," the man said, "but the knowledge we'll gain will last a lifetime." The needle plunged into my chest, and I screamed, a sound that echoed through the sterile room. Pain exploded inside me, and I felt something cold and metallic flood my veins. My vision blurred, and the last thing I saw before I blacked out was the man's face, calm and detached, as if he were watching a particularly interesting science experiment. When I woke up again, I was in a different place. It was a small, dark cell, the only light coming from a small, barred window high up on the wall. My body felt strange, heavy, and unresponsive. I tried to sit up, but I could barely move. My limbs felt wrong, like they weren't my own. Slowly, painfully, I managed to sit up. I looked down at myself and felt a surge of horror. My skin was mottled and discolored, patches of it replaced by strange alien textures. I touched my face and felt the rough, scaly surface where my skin used to be. My fingers were elongated, with sharp, claw-like nails. I was becoming one of their experiments. I wanted to scream, to cry, but no sound came out. I was trapped in my own body, a prisoner of their horrific experiments, and I knew deep down that there was no escape. I was part of the collection now, just another specimen in Rothschild's secret alien museum. As I sat there, the realization sinking in, I heard footsteps approaching. The door to my cell creaked open, and the man stepped inside. He looked at me with a satisfied smile, as if admiring his handiwork. "You're adapting well," he said. "Soon you'll be ready for the final phase. And then we'll see just how far we can push the boundaries of human and alien biology." I wanted to fight, to resist, but I was too weak. All I could do was stare at him, my mind a swirling vortex of fear and despair. "Don't worry," he said, patting my shoulder. "This is only the beginning. We have so much more to learn from you." With that, he turned and left, the door closing behind him with a final, echoing clang. I was alone again, trapped in my own personal hell, with no hope of escape. And as the days turned into weeks, I could feel myself changing, becoming less human with each passing moment. The experiments continued, each one more invasive and painful than the last. My mind was slipping, my sense of self eroding away. I was becoming one of them, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The days blurred into an unending nightmare. My cell became a torture chamber where I was subjected to daily experiments. They never spoke to me, just came in, did their work, and left. Each visit was a new agony, each procedure a step further into madness. One day, they took me to a new room. It was larger, filled with ominous-looking machines and cold metallic tables. The man was there, along with several scientists. He looked at me with that same detached curiosity. "Today is special," he said. "We're going to test your limits." They strapped me to a table and began attaching electrodes to my head, chest, and limbs. The machines hummed to life, and I felt a tingling sensation spread through my body. The man watched from behind a glass window, his eyes never leaving me. The pain started slowly, a low buzz that grew into a burning, searing heat. I screamed, my body convulsing against the restraints. They were pumping something into me, something that felt like liquid fire. My vision blurred, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat a painful jolt. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the pain stopped. My body went limp, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The scientist moved in, checking the machines, taking notes. The man stepped into the room, a satisfied smile on his face. "Excellent," he said. Your resilience is remarkable. We're making progress." They unstrapped me and dragged me back to my cell. I was too weak to resist, my body a mass of pain and exhaustion. As they left, I heard them discussing something about the next phase. I shuddered, wondering what fresh hell awaited me. That night, I couldn't sleep. My body was on fire, every nerve ending screaming in agony. I lay on the cold, hard floor, staring up at the ceiling, my mind a whirlpool of fear and despair. I was losing myself, my humanity slipping away with each passing day. Then I heard it, a faint shuffling noise outside my cell. I sat up, my heart pounding. The door creaked open, and a figure slipped inside. It was another prisoner, a man I hadn't seen before. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "You're new," he whispered. "They've done things to you, haven't they?" I nodded, unable to speak. He moved closer, his voice urgent. "We don't have much time. I know a way out." My heart leaped. Could it be true? Was there really a way to escape this nightmare? But even as hope flared, doubt gnawed at me. Could I trust him? Or was this another trick, another experiment? He seemed to sense my hesitation. "I swear, I'm telling the truth. I've been planning this for months. We have to move now, before they come back." I looked into his eyes and saw desperation, but also determination. I made up my mind. I had to try. I couldn't stay here, couldn't let them turn me into one of their monstrosities. We crept out of the cell, moving silently through the dark corridors. My body ached with every step, but adrenaline kept me going. He led me through a maze of hallways, past rooms filled with strange, otherworldly equipment, and more cells holding silent, vacant-eyed prisoners. Finally, we reached a heavy metal door. He pulled out a keycard and swiped it through the reader. The door clicked open, revealing a long, dark tunnel. "This leads to the outside," he said. "Once we're out, we head for the woods. There's a safe house not far from here." We slipped into the tunnel, the door closing behind us with a final echoing clang. The tunnel was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. We moved quickly, our footsteps echoing off the stone walls. As we reached the end of the tunnel, I felt a surge of hope. We were almost free, but just as we were about to step into the open air, an alarm blared, a deafening, shrieking sound that echoed through the tunnel. "They know!" the man shouted. "Run!" We sprinted out of the tunnel, into the cold night air. The woods loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but they were our only hope. We plunged into the trees, branches whipping at our faces, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. Behind us, I could hear the sounds of pursuit, shouts, the barking of dogs, the thudding of heavy boots. Panic surged through me, but I pushed on, driven by sheer desperation. We ran for what felt like hours, the forest seeming to close in around us. The man led the way, his movements sure and confident, but I was slowing down, my body weakened by the experiments and the constant pain. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, we stumbled upon a small cabin hidden deep in the woods. The man pounded on the door, and it swung open, revealing a woman with a fierce, determined look in her eyes. "Get inside, quickly," she hissed. We collapsed inside, the door slamming shut behind us. The woman bolted it, then turned to us, her expression softening. "You made it," she said to the man. I was beginning to worry. He nodded, too exhausted to speak. The woman looked at me, her eyes filled with pity. "We'll keep you safe," she said. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a glimmer of hope. maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to escape the nightmare. But even as I sat there, catching my breath, I knew the fight wasn't over. The Rothschilds wouldn't give up so easily. And deep down, I feared that no matter how far I ran, the horrors of that place would always be with me, haunting my every step. The cabin was a temporary refuge, but the fear of being found lingered in the air. The woman, whose name was Claire, tended to our wounds and gave us something to eat. She explained that she had been helping people escape the Rothschild experiments for years, ever since her brother had been taken and transformed into one of their twisted creations. "You can't stay here long," she said, her voice urgent. "They have resources and will track you down, but I have contacts who can help you disappear." As Claire and the man, who introduced himself as Mark, discussed the next steps, I felt a growing sense of unease. The more I learned about the Rothschilds' reach and influence, the more hopeless our situation seemed, but there was no turning back now. We spent the night in the cabin, taking turns keeping watch. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig outside made my heart race. My body still ached, the alien textures under my skin a constant reminder of what I'd endured. Sleep was a fleeting illusion, haunted by nightmares of the experiments and the faces of other prisoners. In the early hours of the morning, Claire led us to a hidden path through the woods. We walked for miles, the dense forest gradually giving way to a small remote village. Claire's contacts were there, part of an underground network dedicated to exposing and dismantling the Rothschilds' horrific operations. The villagers welcomed us cautiously, aware of the danger we brought with us. An older man named Harold, who seemed to be the leader, explained the plan. "We have a safe house several towns over. It's hidden, off the grid. You'll be safe there while we figure out our next move." As we prepared to leave, I noticed a young girl watching us from the edge of the group. She had the same unnaturally glowing blue eyes as the child I'd seen in the museum cells. She approached me hesitantly, her small hand reaching out to touch my scarred arm. "They did this to you, too?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, unable to speak. She looked up at me with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "We're going to stop them," she said with quiet determination. "We have to." Her words filled me with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just running away. I was part of a larger fight now, a battle against the monstrous entity that had taken so much from so many. The journey to the safe house was arduous, but we made it without incident. The house was secluded, hidden deep in the woods, far from prying eyes. We settled in, grateful for the temporary safety. Over the next few weeks, we worked with Harold and his network, gathering information and planning our next steps. They had contacts in the media, people willing to risk everything to expose the truth. We collected evidence, testimonies from other survivors, anything that could shine a light on the Rothschilds' secret museum of horrors. But as we dug deeper, the danger grew. We intercepted communications that indicated the Rothschilds were closing in on us. Their agents were everywhere, blending seamlessly into society, ready to strike at any moment. One night, as we were finalizing our plans to go public, the safe house was attacked. It happened so suddenly, a coordinated assault that left us scrambling for cover. Windows shattered, doors were kicked in, and masked figures poured into the house, armed and ruthless. We fought back as best we could, but we were outnumbered and outgunned. Claire and Harold were taken down quickly, their bodies crumpling to the floor. Mark and I managed to escape through a hidden tunnel in the basement, the sounds of gunfire and screams echoing behind us. We ran through the woods, the moonlight barely enough to guide our way. The attackers were close behind, their shouts growing louder. I felt a burning pain in my side and looked down to see blood seeping through my shirt. I'd been hit, but there was no time to stop. We stumbled upon an old barn, its doors hanging open. We hid inside, trying to catch our breath. Mark was injured too, a deep gash across his forehead. He looked at me, his eyes filled with despair. "They won't stop," he said. "Not until we're all dead." I knew he was right. The Rothschilds had too much to lose. They would hunt us to the ends of the earth to protect their secrets. But I couldn't give up. Not now. We stayed in the barn until dawn, then made our way to the nearest town. We found a payphone and made a call to one of Harold's contacts, a journalist named Sarah, who had been working with us. She agreed to meet us at a motel on the outskirts of town. Sarah was waiting for us when we arrived, her face pale with worry. She helped us inside, tending to our wounds as we recounted the attack. "We have to go public now," she said, her voice trembling. "It's our only chance." We spent the next few days compiling everything we had, sending it to media outlets and posting it online. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The world was horrified by the revelations, the atrocities committed in the name of science and power. But the Rothschilds didn't go down quietly. They fought back with everything they had, discrediting witnesses, destroying evidence, and using their vast resources to cover their tracks. It was a battle on all fronts, a war for the truth. In the end, we made a difference. The world knew the truth, and the Rothschilds' grip on their horrific empire began to weaken, but it came at a cost. Many of us didn't survive the fight, and those who did were forever changed. I live in hiding now, constantly looking over my shoulder, knowing that they could come for me at any moment, but I have no regrets. I faced the darkness, exposed the horrors, and fought for those who couldn't. And every night, as I lie awake in the silence, I remember the faces of those I lost, the screams of the tortured, and the cold, emotionless eyes of the man who started it all. The nightmares still haunt me, the scars still ache, but I hold on to one thing, the hope that someday we will be free from their grip, because the truth is out there, and it will never be silenced. I ordered a hitman of the dark web to kill my brother. The next day, I found that was his best friend. I've made a lot of bad decisions in my life, but this one takes the cake. I never thought it would come to this. Never thought I'd stoop so low. But here I am, and there's no turning back. My brother Jake and I never got along. It wasn't just sibling rivalry, it was pure hatred. I was the older one, and he always got the attention. He was the golden child, the favorite. My parents doted on him, while I got the scraps. I was invisible, a shadow in his perfect light. Jake was charming, smart, and successful. He had it all, the looks, the brains, the friends. I was the screw-up, the black sheep. I couldn't hold down a job, couldn't keep a girlfriend. It was like the universe was punishing me for existing. Then came the breaking point. I lost my job, again, and had to move back home. Jake, of course, was living there too, temporarily, between his high-paying job assignments. He loved rubbing it in my face. making snide comments about my failures, my lack of prospects. I snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed him gone. That's when I discovered the dark web. I was drunk and angry, surfing the internet, looking for anything to take my mind off my misery. I stumbled upon a forum discussing the dark web, a place where you could buy anything, even hire a hitman. It sounded too good to be true, but I was desperate. I followed the instructions, downloaded the necessary software, and found myself in a hidden marketplace. It was surreal, like something out of a movie. There were listings for drugs, weapons, fake IDs, and, yes, hitmen. I clicked on one of the profiles. The guy called himself Nightshade. His reviews were glowing, talking about his professionalism and efficiency. I was shaking as I typed out my request. I didn't even think it through. I just wanted Jake gone. The response was almost immediate. Nightshade asked for details: name, address, photo. I sent everything without hesitation. He gave me a price, a lot of money, but I had some savings left. I transferred the bitcoins and it was done. Nightshade promised the job would be completed within 48 hours. I didn't sleep that night. The adrenaline and fear kept me awake, my mind racing with the possibilities. What if I got caught? What if they traced it back to me? But the thought of Jake being gone, out of my life forever, was intoxicating. The next day, I tried to act normal, but every noise, every movement made me jump. I avoided Jake, staying in my room, pretending to be sick. The hours dragged on, and I felt like I was going insane. Then it happened. Around midnight, I heard a commotion downstairs. Muffled voices, a struggle. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept to the top of the stairs. I peered down, and what I saw froze me in place. Jake was there, struggling with a masked figure. My brother was fighting for his life, but the hitman was stronger, more prepared. I watched in horror as Nightshade overpowered Jake, pinning him to the floor. The hitman pulled out a knife, and I almost screamed. I wanted to run down, to stop it, but my body wouldn't move. Then Jake did something I didn't expect. He called out a name. "Mike, help me." It took me a second to process, but then it hit me. Mike was Jake's best friend. They'd been inseparable since childhood. Why would he call for him now? The hitman paused, just for a second, and in that moment, Jake managed to rip off his mask. My blood ran cold. It was Mike. Jake's best friend was the hitman I hired. Jake looked up at me, his eyes filled with confusion and betrayal. "You did this," he whispered. "You did this." Mike didn't hesitate. He slit Jake's throat, the sound of the blade cutting through flesh making me nauseous. Blood spurted everywhere, and Jake's body went limp. Mike looked up at me, his eyes cold and emotionless. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and fell to the floor. My mind was reeling, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I had hired Jake's best friend to kill him. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Mike stood up, wiping the blood off his knife. He walked up the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the silence. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. He stopped in front of me, looking down with a smirk. "You got what you wanted," he said. "He's gone." I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. Mike leaned down, his face inches from mine. "But now, you owe me." I didn't understand what he meant. I thought the payment was enough, but as he explained, my terror grew. Mike didn't just want money. He wanted more. He wanted control. And I was trapped, bound by my own actions, unable to escape. That night changed everything. My brother was dead, and his best friend was now my worst nightmare. and it was all my fault. I spent the next few hours huddled in my room, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. I couldn't believe what I'd done, what I'd set in motion. Jake was dead, and Mike was the one who did it. I should have known better. Mike had always been the shady type, the one who knew how to get things done without leaving a trace. The next morning, the reality hit me like a ton of bricks. My parents found Jake's body. The house erupted in chaos. My mother screamed. My father yelled for someone to call the police. I stayed in my room, pretending to be asleep, paralyzed by fear and guilt. The cops came asking questions, looking for clues. I had to play the part of the grieving brother, the one who had no idea what had happened. It was the hardest acting job of my life. I kept my answers short, my eyes downcast, avoiding their gaze. Every second felt like an eternity. Mike was there too, playing his role perfectly. He was the concerned best friend, the one who was just as shocked and devastated as everyone else. He even hugged my mom, offering his condolences. I wanted to scream at him, to tell everyone the truth, but I knew I couldn't. He had something over me now, something that could destroy me completely. Days turned into weeks. The investigation went on, but there were no leads, no suspects. It was as if Jake's killer had vanished into thin air. Mike made sure of that. He knew how to cover his tracks, but he didn't disappear from my life. Quite the opposite. He started showing up more often, coming over for dinner, acting like nothing had changed. He'd give me these looks, these knowing glances that sent shivers down my spine. He'd make little comments, subtle threats that only I understood. One night, a few weeks after Jake's murder, Mike cornered me in the garage. My parents were out, and I was hoping to get some time alone, but he had other plans. "Hey, buddy," he said, leaning against the wall, his eyes cold and calculating. "We need to talk." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What do you want, Mike?" He grinned, a sinister smile that made my skin crawl. "You owe me, remember? And it's time to pay up." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew it wasn't good. "I paid you. I gave you the money." Mike shook his head, stepping closer. "Money's not enough, my friend. I need something more. I need you to do something for me." My heart raced, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. "What do you want me to do?" He pulled out a small bag from his pocket and tossed it to me. I caught it, my hands shaking. Inside were pills, white and unmarked. I looked at him, confusion and fear written all over my face. "What's this?" "Drugs," he said bluntly. "You're going to sell them for me. I need a new distributor. Someone clean. Someone the cops won't suspect. And you're perfect." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "I can't do that, Mike. I can't get involved in this." He grabbed my shirt, pulling me close, his eyes burning with anger. "You don't have a choice. You do this, or I tell the cops everything. I'll make sure they know it was you who hired me. You'll go down for your brother's murder." I felt like I was drowning, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "Why are you doing this?" "Because I can," he said simply, releasing me. "Now, get to work. I'll be in touch." He left, leaving me alone in the garage, holding the bag of drugs. I felt sick, disgusted with myself, and the situation I was in. I didn't know what to do, who to turn to. Mike had me in a vice grip, and there was no way out. The next few days were a blur. I was too scared to sell the drugs, too terrified of what Mike might do if I didn't. He called me, texted me, reminding me of the consequences. I was a puppet, and he was pulling the strings. I started small, selling to a few people I knew from my old job. It was nerve-wracking, constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the cops to bust me. But I had no choice. I had to keep Mike happy, had to keep my secret safe. But the guilt was eating me alive. Every time I saw my parents, every time I heard them talk about Jake, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. They had no idea what I'd done, what I was still doing. I was living a double life, a facade that was slowly crumbling. Then came the night that changed everything. I was supposed to meet a buyer in a sketchy part of town, a deal set up by Mike. I was nervous, my hands sweaty, my heart pounding, but I had to go through with it. I had to keep Mike off my back. The buyer showed up, a rough-looking guy with tattoos and a scar across his cheek. We exchanged a few words, and I handed over the drugs. But something felt off. He was too calm, too casual. That's when the cops showed up. Sirens blared, lights flashed, and I was surrounded. The buyer was an undercover cop, and I was caught red-handed. They arrested me, handcuffed me, and read me my rights. I was going to jail. But that wasn't the worst part. As they put me in the back of the squad car, I saw Mike standing across the street, watching with a smile on his face. He'd set me up. He'd orchestrated the whole thing, ensuring I took the fall. As the car drove away, I realized the full extent of my mistake. I'd tried to get rid of my brother, and in doing so, I'd ruined my own life. Mike had played me from the start, and now he had everything he wanted. I was just another pawn in his sick game, a game that was far from over. Jail was everything I'd feared and worse. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air thick with despair and the stench of unwashed bodies. I was processed, stripped of my dignity, and thrown into a cell with a bunch of guys who looked like they could snap me in half without breaking a sweat. The first few days were a blur of fear and anxiety. I kept my head down, trying to stay out of trouble, but it was impossible to escape the reality of my situation. The other inmates sensed my fear, and that made me a target. I was beaten, humiliated, and constantly on edge, waiting for the next attack. But the worst part was the nights. That's when the reality of what I had done hit me the hardest. I couldn't sleep, haunted by visions of Jake, his lifeless body on the floor, blood pooling around him, and Mike's face, that twisted smirk taunting me. I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making. One night, about a week in, I got a visitor. I was surprised. I hadn't expected anyone to come see me. But when I walked into the visiting room and saw Mike sitting there, I felt a cold dread wash over me. He looked up, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Hey, buddy," he said, leaning back in his chair. "How's life on the inside?" I wanted to leap across the table and throttle him, but I knew better. Instead, I sat down, glaring at him. "What do you want, Mike?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Relax, I'm just here to check on you. See how you're holding up." "Bullshit," I snapped. "You set me up. You got what you wanted. Why are you here?" Mike's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You're right. I did set you up. And I did get what I wanted. But there's more to it than that." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his voice low and menacing. "I need you to do something for me. From the inside." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What could you possibly need from me in here?" He glanced around, making sure no one was listening. "There's a guy in here, a rival of mine. He's been causing problems on the outside, and I need him gone. Permanently." My stomach turned. "You want me to kill someone?" Mike nodded. Exactly. And if you don't, I'll make sure everyone in here knows why you're really here. That you hired a hitman to kill your own brother. You think you're a target now? Just wait until they find out about that. I was trapped. Again. Mike had me by the throat, and there was no escaping his grasp. Who is he? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mike gave me a name and a description. He's in here for armed robbery. Shouldn't be too hard to find. Just make it look like an accident and you'll be taken care of. I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't do this. I wasn't a killer. But what choice did I have? Mike had me cornered, and there was no way out. The next few days were a blur of fear and desperation. I kept an eye out for the guy Mike wanted me to kill, trying to figure out how I could possibly go through with it. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't do it. I couldn't take another life, no matter what the consequences. Then one night, I was attacked in the showers. A group of guys cornered me, beating me senseless. As I lay on the floor, blood pouring from my nose and mouth, I realized they weren't just attacking me at random. They knew. Somehow, they knew what I had done. The beating was brutal, but it was the words that hurt the most. "Brother killer," they hissed, kicking me in the ribs. "You don't deserve to live." I was left broken and bleeding, barely conscious. I didn't know how they'd found out, but it didn't matter. My secret was out, and my life was over. I spent the next few days in the infirmary, recovering from my injuries. The guards kept a close watch on me, but it didn't make me feel any safer. I knew I was a marked man, and it was only a matter of time before someone finished the job. That's when I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't keep running, keep hiding from the consequences of my actions. I had to face what I'd done, no matter what it cost me. I called Mike, using my one phone call to reach him. "I can't do it," I said, my voice weak and trembling. "I can't kill him." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Mike spoke, his voice cold and emotionless. "Then you're dead, my friend. Dead." He hung up, and I knew he meant it. I was a dead man walking, and there was no escaping it. That night, I made a plan. I wasn't going to let Mike win. I wasn't going to let him destroy me completely. I was going to take control, even if it was the last thing I did. I found the guy Mike wanted me to kill. His name was Tony, and he was as tough as they came. I approached him in the yard, my heart pounding in my chest. "Tony," I said, my voice shaking, "we need to talk." He looked at me, suspicion in his eyes. "What do you want?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I know someone wants you dead, and I know who it is." His eyes narrowed. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I'm the one he sent to do it," I admitted, feeling a wave of shame wash over me. "But I can't go through with it. I can't be a part of this anymore." Tony studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's talk." We found a quiet corner, away from prying eyes. I told him everything, about Mike, about Jake, about the deal I'd made. Tony listened, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he nodded again. "All right, I'll help you. But this is going to be dangerous. Mike's not going to take this lying down." I knew he was right, but it was my only chance. "What do we do?" Tony leaned in, his voice low. "We fight back. We take Mike down. For good." I felt a spark of hope, a glimmer of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, I could get out of this nightmare. Maybe I could find a way to redeem myself. But as Tony and I made our plans, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a whole lot worse. Mike was ruthless, and he wasn't going to let me go without a fight. The alliance with Tony was my only hope. He was well connected in the prison, someone who knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of life behind bars. We spent the next few days planning, strategizing on how to bring Mike down. Every moment was a ticking time bomb, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Mike realized I wasn't going to do his dirty work. Tony and I made a pact. We were going to gather intel, find out who Mike's allies were, and figure out how to isolate him. Tony had a network of guys who owed him favors, and he started calling them in. Information trickled in slowly, but it was enough to paint a picture of Mike's operation. Mike wasn't just a hitman. He was running a whole network inside and outside the prison. Drugs, protection rackets, even orchestrating hits from behind bars. He had guards in his pocket, inmates who feared him, and a reach that extended far beyond the prison walls. Taking him down was going to be a monumental task. One night, I was lying on my bunk, staring at the ceiling, when I felt a presence. I turned my head and saw Tony standing there, his face grim. "We need to move fast," he whispered. "Mike's getting suspicious. He's been asking about you." Fear gripped me, but I nodded. "What do we do?" Tony explained the plan. We were going to set a trap, make Mike think I was still loyal, still willing to do his bidding. We'd lure him into a false sense of security and then strike when he least expected it. It was risky, but it was the only chance we had. The next day, I approached one of Mike's guys in the yard. He was a burly, tattooed man named Rico, someone who always looked ready to snap someone's neck. I told him I needed to talk to Mike, that it was urgent. Rico eyed me suspiciously, but agreed to set up a meeting. That night, in a secluded corner of the yard, Mike showed up. He looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. "What do you want?" I swallowed my fear, trying to appear calm. "I'm in. I'll do the job." Mike raised an eyebrow. "What changed your mind?" I shrugged, playing the part. "I realized you were right. I need to survive in here, and you're my best bet." Mike studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. We'll make the arrangements." As he turned to leave, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The trap was set. Now we just had to spring it. Over the next few days, Tony and I laid the groundwork. We spread rumors, planted false information, made sure Mike's focus was on the supposed hit I was going to carry out. It was a delicate balance, keeping him convinced without tipping our hand. Then came the night of the plan. Tony and I had orchestrated everything down to the last detail. We'd chosen a spot in the prison where we could corner Mike, away from the prying eyes of guards and other inmates. Tony's guys were positioned strategically, ready to move at a moment's notice. I was a bundle of nerves as I waited. Every sound, every movement made my heart race. Then I saw him, Mike, flanked by Rico and another of his goons, heading towards our rendezvous point. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. As Mike approached, I stepped out of the shadows. "Mike," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." He stopped, eyeing me warily. "What is it?" "This way," I said, motioning to a more secluded area. "I can't risk being overheard." He nodded, following me. Rico and the other guy stayed a few steps behind, their eyes scanning the surroundings. We reached the spot, a narrow alley between two buildings, and I turned to face Mike. "This better be good," he said, irritation creeping into his voice. "It is," I replied. "But first, I need to know something. Why did you really set me up? Mike's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, I snapped. You knew I'd get caught. You wanted me in here for a reason. Why? Mike's expression turned cold. You were a liability. Too unstable. This way, I could keep an eye on you. My anger flared. So you ruined my life just to keep tabs on me? Pretty much, he said with a shrug. Now, are we done here? Not quite, I said, giving the signal. Tony and his guys moved in, surrounding Mike and his men. Rico reached for a weapon, but Tony was quicker, disarming him and pinning him to the ground. The other guy tried to fight back, but Tony's men were too many. Mike's eyes widened in surprise and anger. You think this will stop me? I stepped closer, my voice low and hard. It's over, Mike. You're done. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You have no idea what you've started. Before I could react, he lunged at me, a knife flashing in his hand. I stumbled back, trying to dodge, but the blade caught my side, pain flaring through me. Tony tackled Mike, wrestling the knife away, but the damage was done. As I lay on the ground, blood seeping through my shirt, I saw the chaos unfolding. Tony's men subdued Mike, beating him into submission. The guards would be here soon, drawn by the commotion, and this nightmare would be over. But as darkness closed in, one thought consumed me. I might have stopped Mike, but the cost was high. Too high, and I wasn't sure I'd ever escape the shadow of what I'd done. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was Tony standing over me, his face a mix of concern and determination. Hang in there, he said. We're not done yet. I drifted into darkness, hoping against hope that there was a way out of this hell, a way to find redemption. But deep down, I knew the worst was yet to come. I woke up in the infirmary, my side wrapped in bandages, the pain a dull throb that echoed through my entire body. It took a moment for my surroundings to come into focus, and when they did, I saw Tony sitting beside my bed. His face was bruised, a testament to the struggle we'd been through. You're awake, he said, relief evident in his voice. You had me worried there for a minute. I tried to sit up, but the pain forced me back down. What happened? Mike's in solitary, Tony replied. He won't be bothering anyone for a long time, but his reach, it's still there. We've got to be careful. I nodded, the reality of our situation sinking in. Taking Mike down had been a victory, but it wasn't the end. There were still loose ends, still threats lurking in the shadows, and I was still haunted by the blood on my hands. Over the next few days, I recovered slowly, but the fear and paranoia never left me. I knew Mike had allies, both inside and outside the prison, and it was only a matter of time before they came for me. Tony did his best to protect me, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. Then one night, it happened. I was lying in my bunk, staring at the ceiling, when I heard footsteps approaching. At first, I thought it was a guard making rounds, but the footsteps stopped outside my cell. The door creaked open, and a shadowy figure slipped inside. I bolted upright, my heart racing. Who's there? The figure stepped into the dim light, revealing a face I didn't recognize, but the look in his eyes was unmistakable. Cold, ruthless. You thought you could take down Mike and get away with it? I scrambled to my feet, my back pressed against the wall. Who are you? A friend of Mike's, he said, a sinister smile creeping across his face. And I'm here to finish what he started. Before I could react, he lunged at me, a knife glinting in his hand. I barely managed to dodge, the blade slicing through the air inches from my skin. I grabbed a metal stool, swinging it at him with all my strength. The impact knocked him back, but he recovered quickly, his eyes filled with rage. We fought, the small cell filled with the sounds of struggle and grunts of pain. He was strong, but desperation gave me an edge. I managed to disarm him, the knife clattering to the floor. But he wasn't done yet. He tackled me, slamming me into the wall, his hands around my throat. I gasped for air, struggling against his grip. Spots danced in my vision, darkness closing in. But I wasn't going to die here. Not like this. Summoning every ounce of strength, I kneed him in the groin, breaking his hold. He stumbled back, giving me the opening I needed. I grabbed the knife, turning it on him. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. I drove the blade into his chest, the force of the blow sending him to the ground. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock. You'll never be free," his words echoed in my mind as his body went limp, the life draining from his eyes. I stood there trembling, the knife slipping from my grasp. I had killed again, and this time there was no one to blame but myself. The guards arrived moments later, alerted by the noise. They found me standing over the body, blood on my hands, a vacant look in my eyes. They dragged me away, placing me in solitary, the cold, dark cell, a reflection of my inner torment. Days turned into weeks, each one blending into the next. The isolation was maddening, but it gave me time to think, to reflect on the choices that had led me here. I had wanted to rid myself of Jake, to erase the shadow he cast over my life. But in doing so, I had become something far worse. Tony visited me once, his face grim. "You did what you had to," he said, trying to offer comfort. "But this place, it changes you." I knew he was right. The prison had stripped away everything, leaving me with nothing but my guilt and regret. I had tried to play a dangerous game, and I had lost. There was no redemption, no escape from the consequences of my actions. One night, as I lay in my cell, I heard whispers, faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent. They echoed in the darkness, voices I couldn't ignore. They spoke of betrayal, of blood, of the lives I had taken. Jake's face haunted my dreams, his eyes filled with accusation. Mike's laughter echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of my failure. And the man I had killed, his final words, a curse that followed me into the depths of my despair. In the end, I realized there was no escaping the darkness. It had consumed me, body and soul. The prison walls were just a physical manifestation of the true cage I was trapped in, the prison of my own mind. I had ordered a hitman to kill my brother, and in doing so, I had unleashed a chain of events that destroyed everything. I had become a monster, no better than the man I had tried to stop. And now, I would spend the rest of my days paying for my sins, locked in a cell of my own making. The darkness was my only companion, the whispers my only solace. I was alone, forever haunted by the ghosts of my past. And as the days turned into years, I knew there was no redemption, no escape from the nightmare I had created. I was a prisoner, not just of the walls around me, but of my own choices. And that was a fate worse than death.